role of finance and the financial managers, they're actually quite different from accounting. It's a different mindset, different skill set in a lot of ways too. It really is how you acquire funds and then manage those funds in the firm. A huge part of the job is preparing budgets, looking at analysis as to where you stand, such as cash flow, looking for expenditures. You're looking at a short range objectives, long range objectives. You want to sit down and do forecasting in the process as well. It really is about managing the resources, sometimes more than finances, to make certain the organization meets its objectives as you go through. You want to look at data. You want to have strategies. You want to sit down and look like over here, Michael Miller overhauled Goodwill up in Portland, Oregon, and he treated the nonprofit like a for-profit business. He trimmed operating expenses. He compared stores, sales by stores. He closed weak outlets, opened new ones in the process, and his sales soared from 4 million to over 135 million, eliminating the need for outside funding. They became self-sustaining in the process. Incredible work as you go through. He really was successful because he looked past the normal scope of the job and he expanded it into something that became the equivalent of a for-profit business. Even though it's a nonprofit world, he really helped improve the overall performance of all the stores. Who's who in finance? It's rather interesting from my perspective. In the United States, on the East Coast and the Midwest, there's a tendency to call your chief financial officer really your chief business officer. That is almost a standard terminology. On the West Coast, we tend to call him chief financial officer. It could be a function of geography or who went to what school, who knows what it comes from. There are also people that are called certified financial planners that help others with financing. You also have a chartered financial analyst. Those are all certifications you can get in the process. You also have this thing called the controller. Okay, the controller is your chief accounting officer. Sometimes they call it a comptroller. You know, but I had a discussion one time with somebody who was a comptroller. They argued for all the merits that they're not a controller. I rolled my eyes and says, yeah, right. Okay, it wasn't worth even arguing about. They both mean exactly the same thing. They're your chief accounting officer when it comes down to it. So the signs you need a CBO, really a lot of times when you're starting a small business, and as you expand, your CEO is running around putting out fires all over the place. Eventually, they end up wanting to hire somebody that handles the day-to-day operations of the business world. So it depends where you're at and what you're doing and the size of your organization. Somebody is being your chief business officer, even if they don't know it, even if you don't call them that. Somebody has to do this work. The accounting work of the firm, managing the finances, falls on the shoulders of somebody. We just sometimes don't always recognize what it is. Here's a lot of the different things that a finance manager does inside the organization. They look at budgeting, they look at auditing, they want to manage all the different hours, all these things on the funds process. These are the things that they do on a daily basis, day in, day out. They're really focusing not so much on people, but about how people spend the money, and they track it, making certain you're within budget as you go through. They pay attention to the things that are outside the organization that really can't be a threat or a benefit to the things inside the organization. They look at the market unpredictability. They watch the interest rates to see when's a good time to borrow money and when it's not. They look at cyber threats. Cyber threats is becoming very, very serious. Right now, we've actually had at least 2 cities on the East Coast and 4 on the West Coast and the middle states sitting here, and they had their data hacked inside the city, and they had to pay a ransom. It's called ransomware to sit down and get their records back. It can damage somebody incredibly. They're estimating that currently by the year 2025, the entire cyber threat industry will be greater than all of the illegal drug selling on the planet by 2025. We have countries. North Korea actually has an arm of its military that goes in and they rob banks, they rob whatever in the process. They gather money for their own programs. There's allegations that Russia has something similar, and who knows what other major powers have people whose sole job is to sit down there and penetrate the firewalls of different organizations for their own benefit, to benefit their country over the detriment of another country in the process. It's really an awful place, but you also have a whole bunch of thieves out there trying to raid accounts, trying to take money away from people that work for it or people that earned it in the process. Sometimes financial regulations change from the government. Every time you have one party, and it doesn't matter which one, that takes control of the White House, boom, they make a shift over here. The next one comes in, they make a shift over here, they make a shift over here. You have all this going back and forth. The best thing is that the CPAs, the certified public accountants, they get to make a lot of money by interpreting the regulation changes. Yes, yes, if you're an accountant, it's a good thing. The dollar, sometimes the dollar goes up and sometimes the dollar goes down. It works for good, it works for bad. It depends as to if you're exporting or importing in the process. Foreign competition, no tariffs, it's wide open. Yes, it's an open market. No, it is not, because of the fact that just because there's no tariffs doesn't mean that a government like France doesn't help out the company that it sits on its own airport called Airbus. Airbus has somebody from the French government sitting on it, and gee, their goal isn't to make the profit for the company, but to make certain their people are employed in the country of France. It's called foreign competition. Is it fair? No, it's not, but it's how they operate, and we have to operate in this world environment. Environmental regulations. One of the biggest problems that we had with the USMCA agreement that replaced the NAFTA agreement before was that Mexico has a series of different standards, totally different than the United States. Our standards are much stricter on environmental issues and on safety issues for trucks. Mexico went through, they adopted a lot of our standards to comply, and that way would eliminate unfair competition. If they can sit down and dump chemical waste into the ground in Mexico, and you can't do it over here, they eliminated a lot of those problems over there, and Mexico elevated its standards to help meet ours. Really a positive thing for them and its citizens as well. So the value of understanding finance, here are the three most common reasons that a firm fails financially. When you first start up the company, you have to have money set aside just in case things don't go as you plan. It's called capitalization. If you don't have enough, the first year or two can be dangerous, if not dramatically destructive to your business. You may never get off the ground well if it's undercapitalized. So number one is undercapitalization. You need to know that term, not just for this class, because it's going to be on the test, by the way. Okay, but you also need to know it for your own business when you go into business on your own, or you're a chief business officer of business. Understand what that is. The second one is poor control over cash flow. That's why we have a statement of cash flow as one of the three main reports that you run over in accounting. Cash flow is a big thing. You may have a huge accounts receivable and can't collect the bills in the process. So you have to sit down there and go back and regulate your cash flow, make certain the money that you're putting out has money coming in. A third one is inadequate expense control. A lot of times, especially in small businesses, they run all over the place trying to figure out what's going on. Even in big businesses. One time I was working as an internal auditor, and I went through a college. We had 12 different places were taking in money, and we had almost no good uniform controls throughout the whole organization that made it exactly the same. We reduced it from that number down to 3, and that was it. And we had tight controls in place, and miraculously, we made more money because the sloppy accounting out there sat there, and people were doing all kinds of stuff. We don't know exactly, except we do know that we made more money after we put more controls involved in the process. So what is financial management? They pay the bills, they collect overdue payments. They really are critical, even more so to the small and medium-sized businesses, and often they get ignored in the process because they're running around putting out fires as they go. It's a big thing. You got a picture here, it's a very nice one, of a huge, gigantic 12-yard mining truck. If there's no gasoline or fuel to go into that monster, okay, then it's going to have a hard time hauling anything anywhere. You have to be able to balance things out, manage your budget, and know what's going on and when it's going on, and plan for that in the process with different kinds of forecasting as you go through and planning. CBO, CFO, controller, finance versus accounting, and big picture planning, those are all meaningful areas in the world of finance and financial managers. Take care.